Psalm 108. With God we shall do valiantly. A song, a psalm of David. My heart is steadfast, O God. I will sing and make melody with all my being. Awake, O harp and lyre. I will awake the dawn. I will give thanks to you, O Lord, among the peoples. I will sing praises to you among the nations. For your steadfast love is great above the heavens. Your faithfulness reaches to the clouds. Be exalted, O God, above the heavens. Let your glory be over all the earth, that your beloved ones may be delivered. Give salvation by your right hand and answer me. God has promised his holiness. With exaltation I will divide up Shechem and portion out the valley of Succoth. Gilead is mine, Manasseh is mine, Ephraim is my helmet, Judah my scepter, Moab is my wash basin. Upon Edom I cast my shoe, over Philistia I shout in triumph. Who will bring me to the fortified city? Who will lead me to Edom? Have you not rejected us, O God? You do not go out, O God, with our armies. O grant us help against the foe, for vain is the salvation of man. With God we shall do valiantly. It is he who will tread down our foes. It's psalms like these that are difficult to understand, because here we see an image of Israel that is moving towards their directed goal, which is defined and settled within the promised land. And so they see among themselves various nations, enemy nations. And so they take it upon themselves to view this as an obstacle that must be traversed. And in so doing, I can't help but to think that there's something missing. As though the institution, as we have discussed before, the institution has been perverted by the structure or the scaffolding that upholds it. Now, this may not be the case. It may be that empirically or truthfully, the nations that surround them are godless. They are inferior in some way. But in that way, I have to wonder at the approach. Because on one hand, if you had a truly God-fearing society, a godful society, and you establish a city, this city is prosperous, on one hand, two possibilities, I think, open before you. One is the possibility of jealousy from the neighbors that surround. Inevitably, the success of the city will encroach upon their lives in some way. And so whether it be by jealousy or by perceived infiltration into their sacred space, their holy space. And so I should back up and I should say that the principle that I'm outlining here, the one of the two, I mentioned jealousy being the one, but I think it is a subsidiary to something that is greater. So jealousy is a component of this, but it is all of the potential consequences that would lead to a negative perception of this new and successful state. Again, jealousy being one, the expansion of borders, the fruitfulness of one's farmland, the potential destitution of the surrounding nations, that through their suffering, they feel that it is necessary to take from their neighbors. And on the other hand, we see an entirely different side, different opportunity, in which the nations that view this prosperity see an opportunity for themselves, an opportunity to learn and to discover what it is that successful people must do so that their society becomes successful. And in such a case, I can imagine a culture that merges if they surrender something that they had at once felt dear to them, but now have lost their faith. A difficult thing to do. There's a lot of ego that is built into this sort of thing. But you have to wonder, still, at the approach of Israel here. Let's say they follow God, and they ask God to be with their armies, to go out with them. And I can't help but to imagine that this way, while in theory I think it is, or hypothetically I should say, it is certainly possible that the divine can walk with a force of men, and this force is something akin to an army that they intend to inflict destruction for the greater good. It's possible, but its scope of action, I think, is inherently limited, because this type of reliance on this way of solving problems, I think, has many externalities to it, and these externalities are unforeseen by those that participate in this type of problem solving. And so again, on one hand, we have the increasing possibility for conflict, and certainly in the mind of the author that is writing this, conflict is on the mind. We see the division of Shechem. We see claims over Manasseh and Gilead. Moab being the wash basin. Edom, I cast my shoe. Upon Edom I cast my shoe. Over Philistia I shout in triumph. Dangerous territory. And as in many psalms, we have the introduction serving as an orientation towards the song, melody, praise, steadfast love of the divine, faithfulness, glory, deliverance, and salvation. But great risk. And I think that there's not enough information within this psalm for me to say, yes, they were in the right. They walked completely in the eyes of God. But as we know, in the time of David, even though he was favored in the sight of the Lord, I think we must remember that the Lord did not wish a king over Israel. And I think we also have to imagine that after David, Israel suffered numerous periods of poor leadership and faced, at times, enslavement and near destruction of the peoples. And so, if they had at this point had all the answers, they were a divine conduit. They had a conduit to the divine. I can't imagine that they would have I can't imagine that they would have fallen to such a degree after David's reign. And so that's what brings hesitancy here. I don't have a problem with the fortified city or the leading of one to the promised land. I don't have a problem with appealing to God to help against a foe that wishes to suppress righteousness and justice. But again, to return to the main point, there is a profound risk in the statement, "With God we shall do valiantly. It is He who will tread down our foes." And of course, by this very nature, we would think that the foes are foes because they are against the divine order. They are not after truthfulness or love or righteousness or justice. But, once more, it is also possible that those with the capacity for influence in a position of leadership can use this rhetoric. They can use this rhetoric to blind the eyes of those that follow them into thinking that they are doing good, but ultimately they are not doing good in the sight of God. Now, this can either be willful disobedience and subjection of the people on the part of a ruler, or it can be unknowing ignorance. That is, one believes that they are doing good, but in the fact they're doing the very opposite. Psalm 109, "Help me, O Lord my God," to the choir master, a psalm of David. Be not silent, O God of my praise, for wicked and deceitful mouths are open against me, speaking against me with lying tongues. They encircle me with words of hate and attack me without cause. In return for my love they accuse me, but I give myself to prayer. So they reward me evil for good and hatred for my love. Appoint a wicked man against him. Let an accuser stand at his right hand. When he is tired, let him come forth guilty. Let his prayer be counted as sin. May his days be few. May another take his office. May his children be fatherless, and his wife a widow. May his children wander about and beg, seeking food far from the ruins they inhabit. May the creditor seize all that he has. May strangers plunder the fruits of his toil. Let there be none to extend kindness to him, nor any to pity his fatherless children. May his posterity be cut off. May his name be blotted out in the second generation. May the iniquity of his fathers be remembered before the Lord, and not let the sin of his mother be blotted out. Let them be before the Lord continually, that he may cut off the memory of them from the earth. For he did not remember to show kindness, but pursued the poor and needy, and the brokenhearted, to put them to death. He loved to curse. Let curses come upon him. He did not delight in blessing. May it be far from him. He clothed himself with cursing as his coat. May it soak into his body like water, like oil into his bones. May it be like a garment that he wraps around him, like a belt that he pulls on every day. May this be the reward of my accusers from the Lord, of those who speak evil against my life. But you, O God my Lord, deal on behalf, for your name's sake, because your steadfast love is good. Deliver me, for I am poor and needy, and my heart is stricken within me. I am gone like a shadow at evening. I am shaken off like a locust. My knees are weak through fasting. My body has become gaunt, with no fat. I am an object of scorn to my accusers. When they see me, they wag their heads. Save me, O Lord my God, save me according to your steadfast love. Let them know that this is your hand, you, O Lord, have done it. Let them curse, but you will bless. They arise and are put to shame, but your servant will be glad. May my accusers be clothed with dishonor. May they be wrapped in their own shame as in a cloak. With my mouth I will give great thanks to the Lord. I will praise him in the midst of the throng. For he stands at the right hand of the needy one, to save him from those who condemn his soul to death. So, this is a classic psalm of David. Often he is plagued by others who wish to do him harm. We have to remember that David was a king, position of leadership. But well before his position of leadership, he faced significant trials in his life. And so what can we make of this psalm? I think there's a lot of useful information here. And so I want to take my time to unpack it. So we'll start, as we do with the psalms that we like to take our time with, we unpack the title. Help me, O Lord, my God. And so this title, fairly simple, but it serves to orient us to the nature of what this psalm is going to be about. He's asking for help. He's in need of something. And he begins by saying, "Be not silent, O God of my praise." And this is something, again, that's common of the Psalms of David and the Psalms in general. Be not silent. He requires this voice from the divine to show him the way, to show him the answers to the problems that he is confronted with. For wicked and deceitful mouths are opened against me, speaking against me with lying tongues. They encircle me with words of hate and attack me without cause. In return for my love they accuse me, but I give myself to prayer. So they reward me evil for good and hatred for my love. And as I've said before, this type of song, this type of poetry from David is quite common. There's someone out there that wishes to do him harm. He tries his best to walk in the ways of the Lord. And so, I think through David's experience, we can at least see the recognition, the boundaries that are set up between what is wicked and what is not, what is righteous behavior, what is just behavior, and what is not. Because I think often, from an individual standpoint, and from a collective standpoint, as these things scale, that justice and one's belief in what is right depends on fundamental principles. And these fundamental principles are very tricky because they are seated quite deep. And the deeper they go, the greater the impact that they have downstream. And so I think it stands to reason that the deeper a principle goes, the greater the impact that it will have if it is wrong, but also if it is right. And so I think the process by which David is confronted by this supposed wickedness and evil, in the very process of appealing to the divine nature, of appealing to truth in this context, he is truly trying to determine, if he is in the right first and foremost, why it is that those around him wish to do him harm, and what exactly should be the consequence of those that wish to do him harm, and how should they be dealt with. So now we have a picture of this encircled David, the wickedness all about him, his actions being rewarded, evil for good, hatred for love. And he says to God, appoint a wicked man against him. Let an accuser stand at his right hand. When he is tried, let him come forth guilty. Let his prayer be counted as a sin. And so from this, we see a few interesting things. First and foremost, I think it's interesting in the nature of the appeal itself. Because he is asking the divine for something. Now, I've always thought that the propositioning of the divine could be seen as a mistake. A mistake might not be the right term to use, but there's something a bit off about it in my mind, because we are attributing our own will onto the divine, onto the true structure and orientation of reality. Now, if our asking is truly in line with the divine, then we will get what we are asking for. And I think in this way, if we ask God for something that we believe to be right, that we have evidence for to be right, I think the process of doing so can be useful, not only to outline the problem, but also to provide potential solutions, because once one outlines the problem, they understand it. It's visible to them. And I think in this way, they receive the divine wisdom and they receive the answer. And so rather, I would say, to ask for the specific, it would be to ask for the knowledge to understand. Because once one asks for something as specific as appointing a wicked man against another wicked man, to let an accuser stand at his right hand, although this may be genuine and this may be in good faith, I think it limits the possibility for the divine to come into being, into the being of the individual, to fill the soul, to fill the mind, to illuminate. And so what specifically does this mean? I think it means it involves a realization, we can call it a revelation, often in modern day times we use the symbol of a light bulb turning on, because we've connected two things together. We have formed a unity in our minds, whereas before we had bits and pieces of information that were scattered among the multitude that we valued. But it was not until that divine spark, we can call it, we can use this language since we are reading the Bible, these ideas, these principles, whatever they might be, bits and pieces of information, are unified into something that provides us with either an illumination to the problem, as I've said before, or an answer to a particular problem. And some may say this is reasonable. This can be seen as a scientific approach, and very much it is. But instead of using it to understand primarily material phenomena, we apply it to the divine realm. We apply it to lofty things, like that of wickedness, of justice, of sin, and of righteousness. So back to this verse that we were talking about. Appoint a wicked man against him. And so here in David's experience, a wicked man has been appointed against him. And so I believe, if this were coming from me, not to put words in his mouth, if I were to say such a thing, and to appeal to the divine nature, it would be because of the understanding of what it feels like to have the wicked appointed against me. And if the wicked was truly appointed against him, perhaps that would stimulate a degree of self-reflection, and that ultimately may change behavior. But more than that, he says, let an accuser stand at his right hand. So we have to talk about what the right hand means. Now, in previous episodes, we've talked about what the right hand means in reference to the right hand of God, which is often used as a symbol to represent power, authority, salvation, perhaps judgment. In Exodus 15:6, we see the right hand of God leading the Israelites out of Egypt through the Red Sea. And as I've said in previous Psalms, the right hand of God is a source of strength and protection for his people. So it's a guiding force. It's a pillar of stability. But what can we say in reference to this passage here when it applies to the individual? Moreover than just the individual, when it applies to the perceived wicked individual that David is talking about here? Well, in one sense, I think it could represent exactly the same. That is, the power and the authority and the structure, the stability, the guiding hand, the strong hand that every individual has. And it's with this hand that they go about moving objects, interacting with the world, and all of this sort of thing. But in the divine sense, in the heavenly sense, in the symbolic sense, the right hand of man differs from the right hand of the divine in that it's imperfect. It's subject to delusion. It's subject to deviation. And the wicked man, I think, is the prime example of the one in which the right hand of this wicked person has deviated from the goodness or the grace of the divine or of God. And so when David says, let an accuser stand at his right hand, it is saying that David would like to see for this event to happen to this individual in which the accuser, so the person that has been affected by the wickedness of this individual in question, is in front of this person's right hand. They are preventing their continued power and authority to be used in a way that would proliferate their wickedness. And so, how can this happen if an individual, an accuser, a victim, we can say, let's just assume that this person is a true victim, if they stand before them, what power are they to have in the face of the power of the wicked that has subjected them to the authority of their own right hand? Well, verse 7, when he is tried, let him come forth guilty. Let his prayer be counted as a sin. And so here we see the institutionalization of the divine spirit, I think, because for him to be tried implies that there is more people involved than just the accuser, and the accused. It involves this trial, which inherently involves determining the truth of the situation. Now here we see the divine spirit, because the divine spirit is truth. So, if we say that we are conducting this trial to find truth, then how is it that we find truth in the face of wickedness, of perverse morality? How are we to know truthfully that we can receive this wisdom from God, or from the truth of all that there is, the uniting factor of the multiplicity of principles and of ideals and of ways of being that exist in the human landscape? How do we unify them into such a thing as a court of justice? And how do we properly execute a trial? Those questions shall be placed on hold for now, because the purpose of these verses are to sort of outline different potential, part of the purpose, I would say, is to outline different potential consequences for the wicked person. And so it continues. After he says, let his prayer be counted as sin, which I should say is an implication that when this wicked person appeals to the divine, appeals to all that there is actually operating under a delusion. If they truly believe that they're appealing to God, and they are actually appealing to some lower nature, how low that nature goes, who knows? But in the case of the wicked, it probably goes quite low. And so their God, their unity, becomes something that is perverse, something that is damaging to the unity of a society, to the unity of a relationship, perhaps even the unity of mind. And it creates conflict. It creates intra-anxiety. It creates anxiety within the community. And so, what David is asking here, when he says, may his prayer be counted as sin, is essentially saying, allow us to retain the idea of what is right, in the face of the multitude of those who wish to say what they believe is right, but truly is not right. So he's saying, let us maintain this ultimate standard. May his days be few. May another take his office. May his children be fatherless, and his wife a widow. May his children wander about and beg, looking for food far from the ruins they inhabit. This, of course, would lead to the end of this person's line, so that his wickedness cannot continue. Certainly tough, it's direct, but I think there's truth to it. Now, in our modern day society, what the implications of that are interesting, but it's only really interesting how it's applied, because it could be applied in certain ways that I think would be tyrannical, right? I mean, if you give the power of the divine to do such a thing to a man and place it, for example, in the hands of government, this is a sin, because it is not the government's responsibility for doing such a thing. It is, in fact, the way in which, the proper way in which we are oriented, that we operate in this world through fixed laws of nature. It's up to the force that set that in motion to determine the heavenly, let's say, the heavenly interactions of man. That is to say, when nature finds itself in a position where it can freely make decisions, it has entered a realm that lives by its laws, but now it does so with its own interest in mind. And to have one's own interest in mind, I think, it has to do with this idea of the self, and again, the interest, meaning that it recognizes a certain degree of the self, enough to make it distinct from others that are around it, or from other living beings. It's able to recognize what it is. It is able to have feelings that belong to it, feelings that it can share with others, feelings that others can influence. But within the confusion, therein lies the question, what self shall there be so that the preservation of these beings is possible? And so, when we talk about giving government this responsibility, it is taking from the very image of the divine mind that would have within it the answer to how truly to punish the individual that is wicked, to know how to truly end the line of the wicked person. And this is true judgment. And so while we can remain objective with our national laws, there are certain realms, I think, that secular law cannot touch, and that is by design. It's a safety mechanism, so that it doesn't produce an ungodly force in this world that we inhabit. a human force that deludes itself into thinking that it is God. Almost like we were talking about earlier, at the level of the individual with his own delusions, becoming the wicked person, thinking that he is actually the good person, the misplaced good. If we scale that up all the way to the level of the nation, this can have a profound effect on a society, and can ultimately, I think, lead to the dissolution of the bonds that hold the entirety of the body together, which is why it's important. May the creditor seize all that he has. May strangers plunder the fruits of his toil. Let there be none to extend kindness to him, nor any to pity his fatherless children. May his posterity be cut off. May his name be blotted out in the second generation. May the iniquity of his fathers be remembered before the Lord, and let not the sin of his mother be blotted out. So verse 14, I think, is interesting. May the iniquity of his fathers be remembered before the Lord. And so, what does this mean? I think it means a couple of things. First and foremost, I sort of return to this idea of David's way of going about things. Because when he says, may the iniquity of his fathers be remembered before the Lord, it's not the case that God does not remember. Or it's not the case that God does not know, even before it happens. These are patterns of being, right? Wickedness is a pattern of being. This is something that the divine mind would understand before the wickedness would even partake in their wickedness. And so to say, may the iniquity of his fathers be remembered before the Lord, it really has nothing to do with this conversation of God, but rather this conversation that's within David, within his mind, as he's going through the process. And I think it may be useful for some people, I don't know, but at least from my own standpoint, it seems as though there is a more sophisticated way of talking to the divine. And it would not include this asking of may the iniquity of his fathers be remembered before the Lord, because the Lord already knows that. And so if we go into the conversation of this with the understanding that God already knows that the pattern of wickedness exists, the concern is that the collective, the society, the individual will forget what happened. They will forget the behavior of the wicked and the consequences of the wicked. And so I think what he's really saying is, allow us not to forget the wickedness, the pattern of the wicked, and what should be done about these people. And let not the sin of his mother be blotted out. And so again, it's a symbol of remembrance. And I think to say something such as the sin of the mother, I think is quite profound. Because it's not the case that we have a particular instance of what the mother had done to be considered a sin, but rather it is the sin of the mother. It is the misbehavior of the mother, which implies a critical role of the mother in the child's life. And if there was a sin at that point in the child's development, a sin against the divine order and way of things, then it's likely that this wickedness could have been brought about. And so if we do not forget this sin, we can change the behavior of our parenting so that it would reduce the likelihood of having a wicked person develop and be cast into our society to corrupt it. Let them be before the Lord continually, that he may cut off the memory of them from the earth. Okay, so now we know what we wish to be done to this person. Quite extreme, right? But in such severe criticism of this wicked individual, for what reason should we do this? He did not remember to show kindness, but pursued the poor and the needy and the broken-hearted, to put them to death. He loved to curse, let curses come upon him. He did not delight in blessing. May it be far from him. He clothed himself with cursing as a coat. May it soak into his body like water, like oil into his bones. May it be like a garment that he wraps around him, like a belt that he puts on every day. May this be the reward of my accusers from the Lord, of those who speak evil against my life. Okay, so I think we have some pretty good reason here now to suspect that this person was a wicked person. Not showing kindness, pursuing the poor and the needy and the broken-hearted, and putting them to death. That is quite the crime. And this loving of curse, I think, is interesting, because in my mind I ask, well, when I think of cursing, I think of words that we consider to be curse words. And it's these words that are in our society, in the United States, in the year 2023, are used flippantly. I myself use them casually, and I don't think about them much. However, I have had the thought come across my mind on many occasions on the purpose of cursing and what impact does it have. And in my mind, at the time, I felt that there was very little impact, because the words themselves that we use that are considered to be curse words are so diluted in their meaning that I find it difficult that they can have an impact at all. But here now, I would like to explore it in a greater depth, in greater detail. And in terms of cursing, I think that not all curses have the same value to them. Just like sins, not all sins have the same value to them. Certain sins, certain behaviors have more severe consequences than others. Anybody understands this. They don't have to believe in a God at all to understand that. But it's necessary to believe in something to understand that there can be a sin at all. And so in this way we have this separation from the understanding, the basic understanding of our experience, from the abstract understanding of how it is that we can grow into maturity and into upright and righteous people. It's through the distinction that we have to have some source that we draw from, that a tradition surrounds, that props up. Of course, there are no shortage of instances in human history where the very structure that was built around a pursuit became perverted. Perhaps it crumbled under the weight of the antagonism, the perverse incentives that at one time, I think of an institution of health that pursued the health of the individual patients, that then turned into a giant, and this giant, their path, their principled thinking was now no longer congruent with the underlying scaffolding, the underlying support beams that held up the institution in the first place. And under the weight of this antagonism, the thing crumbles. The institution fails. People lose faith in it. They don't attend the... Well, I was going to say they don't go to the hospital. They don't attend the doctor's visits or appointments. But I think in a much more somber tone, I think the individuals will retain their faith as long as they can, because they know the purpose of having an institution that surrounds a good that is as high as an individual's health. And in the absence of an appropriate alternative, they will continue to use it. And I think it's within this continual using of the perverse, of what now is the perverse institution, that will lead to a dramatic shift, a dramatic outcome. And I think this sort of thing can go on for a very long time, and it can harm a lot of people. It could subject them to slavery, financial slavery. It could subject them to poor decision making that actually has reverse consequences, or I should say just have consequences in general that add on to the existing health deficit. And I think we can use this example among many others, not only in our current trajectory, but also examples from history. But once you have one pattern, you've got the story. You understand the nature of the institution. And it's not that the institution is not necessary, but rather that the truth that the institution is built over, that structure, if that structure deviates from the source, I think of like a water well or the source of oil. If you're going to drill for oil or water, the water table and the oil need to be underneath that drill. Otherwise, you're not going to be able to pump it up to the surface. So just like the institution, if you move it to a place that's over a piece of ground beneath which the truth no longer lies, then it will not produce value. It'll be a valueless thing. It'll be a pathology. It'll be a growth, a cancer on society. So it stands to reason, then, if we consider the totality of cursing, the totality of consequences, there may be some that would say that to curse at all still has consequences to it, regardless of the level in which regardless of the level of the curse, let's say. Because if I'm going to use a swear word with no context, none whatsoever, I think this curse, compared to something more detailed, that maybe provides some context for the use of the word. Maybe it's against somebody, against something. It's used in combination with other words that increase the depth of the argument that I'm making against a particular individual. And the curse, in terms of its severity, rises. And others remember what this curse was, and it may bring about a realization and certain consequences to it. So, I do think that there is a level of humor that I think breaks the barrier, or rather the bonds that unite these curses in their scalable reality, where at the bottom we have the lesser of these curses that are accompanied by the lesser of their consequences, all the way up to the top with the higher of the curses with the elevated consequences of their invocation. I think there's a certain way of going about a curse to dissolve it of its flame. And I think there's a certain power that humor has in doing such a thing, whereby using the curse itself, it opens it up to reveal its hollow nature. And in so doing, I think it can provide a very interesting phenomenon, which is a binding of a relationship of two beings that are connecting based on the recognition of using a curse that in some other context would be full of meaning and full of potential consequences. But in this case, using humor to devalue it and then to open it and then to find that nothing is within it. And then everybody laughs. Because in some sense, it's a laughter of relief that they don't have to be bound so strongly by the consequences of these curses. But at the same time, there's a risk. There's a risk of not recognizing the severity of when the curse is used rightfully, what the true consequences of that can be. So I'd say that the true humor is only possible if one understands the true possibilities of the consequences of a true curse. And so to return to this Psalm 17, when he says, "He loved to curse, let curses come upon him," what David is referring to is somebody that liked to curse. They liked to do it because they liked the meaning that was within it. They liked the consequences that followed from it. I mean, just the verse before, we found that this was a person that didn't show kindness to the poor and the needy and the brokenhearted, but put them to death. I mean, this is a very extreme individual. And so I think this commentary, in reflection to our previous commentary about the humor, I think really gives it perspective. Now we really understand what this means, because there is meaning behind this. The true consequences of the wicked that use the true effects of the curses. And the one other reflection I would say is, if our society succumbs to the diluted nature of the satire, then we run the risk of, again, as I've said, not appropriately attributing the proper value to the true curses when they are made, and therefore recognizing the wicked individual. So it's a tricky business. Verse 18, he clothed himself with cursing as his coat. May it soak into his body like water, like oil into his bones. And so this is another interesting thing, because moving away from our comedy example, which is just one pattern and a bunch of different patterns that I think revolve around these curses, we see the individual and his relationship to the curses that he puts forth into the world. And so what David is saying here is, allow him to understand fully what it means when his curses are inflicted upon another. And he uses this imagery of a coat. Have it sink into him, into the very fiber of his being. and in so doing you will understand the consequences of it. May it be like a garment that he wraps around him, like a belt that he puts on every day, the sort of burden that he has to live with. Again, it's a form of imprisonment. It's a judgment. May this be the reward of my accusers from the Lord, of those who speak evil against my life. And here again comes in a bit of David that I'm not sure that I quite like. Now, David, I respect, but there are just instances in his Psalms that just seem a bit too self-oriented for my liking. Now, obviously, he's given us a lot of wisdom here in this Psalm, a lot of wisdom in previous Psalms, but there is this recurring theme with his poems and his songs that seem to be a bit, woe is me, a little bit of Job syndrome, which is a man who is heavily afflicted, and in his affliction, he sort of surrendered his responsibility to life and to others and all this sort of thing. Now, it's not quite of the same magnitude, but I can't help but see some of this here. But who am I to judge? Perhaps this is not my place. In any case, he returns and he says, "But you, O God, my Lord, deal on my behalf for your name's sake. Because your steadfast love is good, deliver me. For I am poor and needy, and my heart is stricken within me. I am gone like the shadow at evening. I am shaken off like a locust. My knees are weak through fasting. My body has become gaunt, with no fat. I am an object of scorn to my accusers. When they see me, they wag their heads." And so I rather like this section of verses here. And so I think if we just had to, if we saw David say in verse 20, when he says, "May this be the reward of my accusers from the Lord, to those who speak evil against my life," I think if that was better integrated with the following verses, I think it would be much more, there would be a much greater degree of humility in this psalm. But when I say that I like the verses that I just read, the 21 through 25, I think that it's a bit of a redeeming quality that David has to, once he says such a thing, he returns and he says, "God, you deal on my behalf for your name's sake. Because your steadfast love is good, deliver me." And so he's saying, he's sort of living up to the previous statement. He's saying that I devote my life to you, and so through me, I'm allowing you to be. But the only problem I have with it is, of course, that we are all infallible, and David was not Christ. He was favored by God, but not Christ. My knees are weak through fasting. My body has become gaunt with no fat. I am an object of scorn to my accusers, and when they see me, they wag their heads. And so I do not deny his suffering in the slightest. It sounds like he had a hell of a time with whatever he was dealing with. Help me, O Lord my God. Save me according to your steadfast love. Let them know that this is your hand. You, O Lord, have done it. Let them curse, but you will bless. They arise and are put to shame, but your servant will be glad. May my accusers be clothed with dishonor. May them be wrapped in their own shame as in a cloak. With my mouth, I will give great thanks to the Lord. I will praise him in the midst of the throng, for he stands at the right hand of the needy one to save him from those who condemn his soul to death. I like that last verse. For he stands at the right hand of the needy one. So he stands at the strong hand. And he says to this individual strong hand, in a sense, you can do it. If you walk this way, I will give you what you need. I will strengthen that right hand of yours. I will save you from those who condemn your soul to death. And it's not the body that he's talking about here, it's the soul. It's the very thing that allows us to be. It is this structure that is of mind, that allows us to communicate and to realize the divine nature, to peer into the heavens, let's say, and to make appropriate decisions so that it can change our material circumstance. And for have someone's soul to die, they enter a state of servitude and of slavery, I think, that they no longer consider their own individual liberation, but rather submit to something that is above them, but that is beneath that of God. And so that's why I like that verse. And so I think we were going to finish this episode here. We are going to continue next time at Psalm 110. It's another Psalm of David. Sit at my right hand